Hello, good morning, and welcome. It's glad to have you join us on Galaxy today, coming to you from Galaxy Television. It's the lifestyle edition, and I'm so excited. My name is Justin Akadonye.
And I'm Stephanie Ojani. Permit me to all wish you a happy new month. Happy new month, Justin.
Thank you so much. Was I going to say same to you?
Of course, let's
Okay.
do it. I just said happy new month to you.
Yeah, okay. Happy, blessed, fruitful, and all dreams come true month.
Oh, thank you.
That's better, right?
Yes, it is. I'm always excited for our lifestyle edition because
Okay.
we get to talk about, real issues that touch on, family, marriage, and then, of course, everything about your personal life. So whenever we talk about anything on lifestyle, it affects 1 or 10 or 20 people.
A
And
whole
then
lot of people, almost
a whole lot of
everyone
people,
can
like,
relate.
Yeah, you
to
can
that.
relate to it, basically. So today we're talking red lines that can save your marriage.
Mm-hmm.
And
Yes.
of course, the process, before we get to that, we'll talk about some other things, happening in relationships before marriage and all of that. We have a guest with us here in the house. She's a relationship architect. She
Yes.
refers to herself as a relationship architect. It's none other than Tomi Toluhi. Good morning.
Good morning, Tomi. And Tomi is a relationship architect committed to helping single and married people design and build great love relationships. She has been in love with the same man for 29 years and married to him for 22 of those years. The insights she shares are born out of her experience of what works and what does not. For over 17 years, she has shared practical wisdom laced with great humor as a keynote speaker in major conferences, seminars, and workshops. Her weekly online show, Tomi Talks TV, watched by over 100,000 social media followers on Facebook, YouTube, Instagram, and Twitter, answers the tough questions people are asking about love and relationships. She is the author of several books, including Making Your House a Home, Touch Me Not, Get Real, the myths and realities of finding and keeping love, and her latest book, One, Launch a New Love Affair with Your Spouse. I could go on and on. She just has a whole...
She has so much, like so much.
So much.
I'm eager to know what the secret of 29 years of marriage is.
Yes.
Find the right person.
29 years of relation, 22.
Find the right person.
That's the first thing. Find
Okay.
the right person.
As you said, find the right person. I have a question. There's always this saying. They always say,
Yeah.
people say, there's only one person for you. And then some people have come out to say it's a lie. There are so many people for you. You can meet people. So let's not just deceive ourselves by saying it's only one person you love and that's it. After that person, any other person that comes will fall short and all of that. Is that true?
Well, I believe actually that there cannot possibly be only one person for you. Because if you look at it this way, if there's only one person for you, and for some reason that person mistakenly marries someone else, then that means you will end up married to someone else who belongs to someone else. So it doesn't really make any sense.
Yeah.
What I think is that there's a range of possibilities at every stage in your life. But then you have to be clear about what you're looking for when you're looking for a spouse, and that's the key, really, of being careful to choose. Because a lot of times people are doing damage control after they get married because they didn't ask the right questions before they got married in the
Tomi,
first place.
that's really the thing, being careful, choosing the right person. It's almost like it's like rocket science, because how would you know that you're actually with the right person? Sometimes you see some things that feel as the signals. At the end of the day, with all the wonderful, rosy relationship before marriage, somehow it goes all right.
Well, that's true. I think the key is this. A lot of times, when people start off in relationships, they're focusing entirely on the emotion of the relationship, the emotion of the moment. But you see, it takes a lot more than emotion to make a marriage work. Like I like to say, it takes more than love to make marriage work. That's the thing.
Wow.
But people, and when I'm saying that, what I mean is it takes more than the feeling of love. So that whole, you've got butterflies in your stomach, you're excited about someone, that sort of thing. But you see, in a relationship, you need to really drill down to the nitty-gritty of getting to know the person you're actually in a relationship with. Yeah. And then another thing I also find is that sometimes people, when they're in a relationship, because of the emotion,
Yes.
they ignore certain things, which I call warning signals.
Okay.
So there are certain warning signals that I believe, are absolute deal breakers. But I find sometimes on my platform, on Tomi Talks TV, people asking questions like, well, he hit me, but should I still marry him? And I'm like, hello, that's an obvious deal breaker, because anything that you see in someone before you get married is just the tip of the iceberg. So you need to realize that if it's a warning signal, that's just a little bit. And when you get married, you're going to see a whole lot more of that.
So it will not change.
It's not going to change. So for instance, marriage is not going to make an unfaithful person faithful. That's the thing. Marriage just brings out more of who you are. So, so you've just got to be, careful and actually look at, okay, so what are the warning signals? And look at the person. Sometimes people get married to someone and they're thinking, well, he would change after I get married to him, or she would change after I get married to her and all that. I say to people, look at them as they are and ask yourself, if this person never changes, will I be happy married to them? And if the answer is no, then just keep walking.
Well, good question. Yeah. Just to remind our viewers, okay, you can be a part of this discussion. Please interact with us on our social media platforms using the hashtag GalaxyTOday. Feel free to send us an SMS. At some point in time, you can actually call if you have a question for our guest. But we are looking today at red lines that can save your marriage. Ladies first.
Okay, now you want me to ask the question before red lines that can save your marriage.
Yeah.
You were saying something about warning signals and all of that, and then I remember the scenario. A guy and a girl are dating, and he's unfaithful to her.
Yes.
And then he marries someone else, or he starts dating someone else, and, well, I wouldn't say he's completely faithful, but he's promised this one that, look, I'm going to marry you, and this is what's happening, and I'm going to be this, I'm going to be that to you, and eventually marries that one whom he promised. Do you think he's going to still be unfaithful in that marriage, or was he unfaithful because the person he was with was not who he wanted?
No, faithfulness is a condition of the heart. It's something that, it's within you. So it's not circumstances that make a person unfaithful. It is who they are. Wow. That's the bottom line. So you're either faithful or you're not. And it all has to do with the conditioning of your mind and how you see things, because a faithful person will be faithful regardless of what the circumstances are, regardless of what their spouse is doing, or the circumstances surrounding their marriage and all that. But it's all about the heart.
But a faithful person cannot change from being unfaithful to being faithful.
It is possible. Okay. It is possible, but it really takes a heart change. So it's not, again, it's not the circumstances that will make them faithful. They've got to realize that there is something wrong with being unfaithful in the first place, and then make up their minds that they're going to actually start being faithful.
So let's talk about red lines that could save your marriage.
Okay.
What exactly are these red lines that could save your marriage?
Well, first of all, a red line is sort of like what I call it's like a point of no return. So they're like boundaries that you ought to set in your marriage to protect your marriage. And I actually think that this is something that all spouses should actually sit down and have a discussion about it before you get married, actually, and say, well, these are certain red lines that we will not cross. So I've got 3 key ones to talk about today. So the first of them is the threat of divorce. One of the big mistakes that people make when they're married is that when they're frustrated with their spouse and maybe something is happening in the marriage, they're trying to solve a conflict, then they start to threaten divorce. You see, but I mean, it's a blunt force instrument. It's sort of like using a butcher's knife to do heart surgery when you need skill to actually solve the problem. So when you're threatening divorce, essentially what it means is that your conflict resolution skills are poor. So because of that, you're resorting to threats, and all that. Well, if you don't, do what I want, then I'm going to leave you, all that sort of thing. It's a red line. And the unfortunate thing about that is, you see, words are creative, so they create the atmosphere around the home. And the thing is, the more you think about those words, the more they become your reality. So we've really got to be careful about not constantly threatening divorce, because it weakens the foundation of the marriage, so to speak. So you've got to have that mindset that if you're committed, you're committed. If you're in it, then you're in it, and you're not going around throwing threats around simply because, you're upset with your spouse and all that sort of thing. And the thing about words is that they're so powerful, once you throw them out there, you can't gather them back up again. So I think that's one key thing.
But Tomi, looking at all of that, it is very, very challenging or hard sometimes, when you've been so pushed to the wall. I know sometimes you say you should rebound, but when it keeps on recurring and you just feel like maybe I just need to tell this guy that if I leave him, maybe he might sit up. So what do? Do you just keep quiet when he's doing the terrible things and you have tried talking and he's still doing those things that affect you?
Well, the thing is you've got to be clear about what your end game is. Okay. So if you want to actually make that marriage work, then the threat of divorce is not going to make that marriage work. Okay. If there is an issue that needs to be dealt with, then you need to actually sit down and work things out. And that's where conflict resolution skills come in. Actually, the challenge is a lot of people don't actually understand how to go about conflict resolution. You know, so because of that, they get really frustrated and, you know, they just, you know, explode and it's like, well, I'm going to leave you sort of thing. But, you know, if you actually figure out how to resolve that conflict and you learn how to sit down and talk about it, that's one step. If that doesn't seem to work, then that's the point at which you need to actually find a counselor. Okay. And sit down with your spouse and say, well, look, if this is going to work, then we need to talk to a counselor. And you talk, you know, the issues through with a counselor. But then at least you're clear in your mind that what you're trying to do is to make the marriage work.
To resolve it.
Yes.
Counselors, that's another thing. How many, the average Nigerian, does he or she believe in seeking the advice and services of a counselor?
Well, that in itself is a challenge. First of all, because we don't have that many people who are experienced in this whole area of, you know, counseling for relationships. That's one thing. And then the other bit is that people like to keep their issues to themselves, so they feel, you know, we ought not to, you know, they don't really want to talk about it. Or they seek the counsel from the wrong places. So, you know, they're talking to their friends, or worse still, talking to their family. And I say to people, that's the worst possible thing you can do.
You can't talk to your family.
You should not. Ideally, talk
like
to
your mother.
That's absolutely the worst. That's absolutely the worst.
Because one would think they're more experienced to understand this.
They have experience, yes, but you see, because they're emotionally attached to you, they might not necessarily, you know, be balanced in their counsel. You see, and then another difficulty with that is once you've resolved the issue with your spouse, they will still have all those lingering feelings. So it alters the dynamics of the relationship with them. So I really don't advise it. Talking to family.
Okay, second red line.
So the second red line is what I call the surrogate spouse. So a surrogate is sort of like someone that steps in to, you know, do things that somebody else should be doing, sort of like an imposter. So, for example, if, you know, you're married to someone, but then there's someone else who you consider to be your best friend, your counselor, your encourager, you know, or look at it this way. If you have some really good news or you have some really bad news, who do you first think about talking to?
Your spouse, ordinarily.
It should be your spouse, but it isn't always your spouse. So a lot of times, people think of someone else. So they've got another best friend, or maybe they've got a colleague at work whom they talk to, you know, and they feel, well, this person understands me, my spouse doesn't understand me as well. You see, and there are many issues with that, and one of those issues is that, you know, many times when people get into infidelity, they did not intend to. It's simply because they opened up emotionally and they opened up too much to someone else.
The wrong person.
Exactly. Who has become like, you know, their encourager and their confidant and all that. So they share things with them that they wouldn't share with their spouse. That person is stepping in and filling a position that their spouse should be filling. And then at the end of the day, it damages the relationship. So, I mean, infidelity does not happen in a day. It usually happens one step at a time. And most of the time, people are not actually thinking about the sexual relationship when, you know, it starts off as, you know, we're just friends, or he understands me, or she understands me, that sort of thing.
Then feelings get involved.
Exactly.
But the thing is that, okay, why in that particular scenario, why shouldn't your wife or your husband be your best friend? Is it wrong to have a best friend outside of your marriage, as in, shouldn't your spouse be your best friend?
Your spouse should be your best friend. But you see, sometimes when people choose a spouse, they're looking for lots of other things, but they don't look for a friend. You see, because anyone you get married to should be someone you would choose as a friend in the first place. Someone you can talk to, someone you can open up to, someone with whom, you know, you share common ground, you share values, that sort of thing. But a lot of times when people are looking for a spouse, they're looking for lots of other things, but they're not looking for that friendship. So then they get married and then they find they're lonely in their marriage. And because they're lonely, then they start to seek, you know, friendship outside. Now, I'm not saying you shouldn't have friends outside, you know, because, you know, depending on the sort of spouse you married, for instance, women tend to be, you know, quite voluble, so we tend to, you know, use a lot of words and talk and all that. Not all men are talkative. So yes, you might need a friend to, you know, to download on, that sort of thing. But when it comes to the deepest things of your heart, it should be your spouse that you share them with. So your spouse should be your best friend, actually.
Okay, still talking about friends and keeping friends. So invariably, a married woman shouldn't be so. Why so?
Like a married man.
To that colleague, that male colleague at the office.
Yes.
Yeah, this is on the so. You got the souls.
Well, let me butt in here.
Okay,
we're
go
talking
ahead.
friendship with the opposite sex,
Yes.
right? Because I mean, even if you're a woman and you have a female friend that you're really close with, that you tell everything, does it have a way of affecting your marriage?
That could also affect your marriage as well,
Oh,
because what you're doing is that you're making an emotional connection with that person that you should be making with your spouse. So it weakens the connection with your spouse. Sometimes it might even be a family member, because you find sometimes people are married, but their confidant is their mother or their father. So mostly it's the mother actually, or a sister, that sort of thing. There's absolutely nothing wrong with talking to members of your family or a friend, but you see, your spouse should be your best friend, and that is the script that should run your mind. Because if you're going to have a really thriving marriage, I'm not talking about two people just living in the same house and your roommates or housemates, as the case may be, but I'm talking about a thriving marriage that you enjoy. It's based on friendship. And friendship is based on that whole thing of shared understanding, talking. That's how you build intimacy. So if you're constantly talking to someone else, rather than your spouse, you're building intimacy with them, not with your spouse.
Okay, what if before the marriage, I don't know if things can change, before the marriage you had a best friend and she had her own best friend and you guys started courting, eventually got married. So the other person stops being the best friend. How do you really want to be? I need to understand this.
Well, that's how it should work. I mean, because when you meet someone else or you're dating or whatever, you have that person as your friend, but it takes a certain level of time to at least develop trust. I think that's what happened in my own relationship. I had a best friend, childhood friend that was like my best friend. If I was sad, if I called him, I'll be happy. If I was happy, I'd call him, and it was all cool. And then my fiance actually said, no, that can't work. It won't work. I'm supposed to be your best friend. I'm like, dude, I just met you like a couple of months ago. I've known him forever. And he's like, And then eventually, it did, that shift did occur. So I think that's how it should happen ordinarily.
You're absolutely right. And I think the key word is what you just said, the shift. So there needs to be a shift. You see, the character of the relationships around you has to shift to take, so that marriage can take its place. Because marriage only works when it's in first place. In terms of human relationships, if it is not in first place, it doesn't work. So your spouse ought to be your first priority. So that shift has to happen, and I think that's the shift that a lot of people don't make. So they want to continue business as usual.
Yeah, I get that. The reason why I asked that question,
Yes.
growing up, primary, secondary school, I had a best friend, a girl, but over time, so it continued when we were in the university, we left school and everything. She eventually got married, but I drifted apart a bit because she's married. Yeah, but she now was complaining that I no longer cared as much as I used to.
I understand that. Well, maybe she's feeling a sense of loss because she feels something has been lost in the relationship. But she needs to understand that that's the way marriage works. Because when you think about it, just like in the scenario that you mentioned, if there's someone else that is that close to you, it becomes a threat. To the marriage. Because how do you want the spouse to feel? You might say, well, there's nothing to it. It's just like people who want to stay in touch with an ex after they're married, and they're like, well, we're just friends, we're really close, and all that. I'm like, you're playing games. That's the reality. You're absolutely playing games. It's one thing to be a friend, but it's another thing to stay so close to that person. If you're going to stay connected to an ex, then that ex should be a family friend, not just your friend. Otherwise, you're absolutely on shaky ground.
Okay.
All right, it's still Galaxy today. I'm getting some messages here. I will take some of them. Just to remind you, you can also do that on social media, on Facebook, Instagram, and of course on Twitter, using the hashtag GalaxyTOday. We'll still have Tomi Toluhi here with us.